Okay, there we are. Welcome back, Keith Tutt.
Thanks.
How are you, sir?
How am I?
Hmm.
I'm very happy. Yeah,
Nice.
I'm enjoying life. A little bit over busy, perhaps, but very good. I'm feeling pretty productive these days. That's the main thing. And there's been a lot of snow, which has been interesting and beautiful as well. Just seeing the snow on the fields here with the dark skies above the white of the fields has been fantastic.
Have you been out and about in it then?
I have actually. I've been taking a lot of photos. I've done a few snow paintings in the past, uh, not necessarily at the time when there's snow, but sort of afterwards. And it's been nice to relive those moments because they're very short, really. You know, the snow only hangs around for a couple of days, and the time when you get beautiful light effects on it, whether it's sun or even kind of darkness, are very specific and short-lived. So to capture that with photos is quite meaningful to me, and to then make paintings out of those images is something to look forward to. Even I might even do it during the summer possibly, but it's not. I like that feeling that I've got some lovely photos of that I can paint from. Of course, if I were a proper painter, I would be doing it en plein air in the midst of the blizzard with my paints getting blown, my canvases getting blown away. There's a brilliant, I think she was originally a Glaswegian artist called Joan Eardley, who really worth looking into, Joan Eardley. And she did two types of paintings. Some were portraits of very poor children from the Glasgow tenements, and just stunningly characterful, but quite sketchy in a way, but just so full of compassion and sensitivity. And then the other kinds of paintings she did were somewhere in Scotland on the coast, and she would go out when the storms were raging to the cliff top with an enormous canvas, massive canvas, and all her paints. And there are photos of her painting the storm in the midst of it, like King Lear with a canvas. Just fantastic, and I love her work very much.
What kind of period are we talking about? Recent?
Yeah, probably. Actually, I think probably the 50s. Actually, I may be wrong. It may have been before the Second World War, but I think it was the 50s.
Well, have a look. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, Joan Eardley, Eardley. I'd recommend, well, anyone to have a look at her work. I saw her work at one of the Scottish National Galleries a few years ago, and it was just so liberated, and I just felt it somehow gave something in me permission to paint in a certain way that I don't know quite why, but sometimes I feel I need permission internally to do certain kinds of work. And it may just be seeing something that someone has done and going, oh yeah, you can do that.
Yeah. I get
Right.
I get that. It's funny because you were saying about the snow and painting. I've been thinking of nothing but painting when I've been out walking in the snow.
Right.
There's something about those conditions. I think it's because it's so unusual, and for me it shows you how much color is in the snow. You know, the obvious one is the blue in the shadows, and there's blue everywhere.
Yeah.
And then you get the diamonds on the surface, the sparkle. They're so intense, incredible in the sunlight. And of course, all the trees in the woods here, the color of the bark, all the greens and reds and browns and oranges, all these colors in the actual bark that normally are a bit more hidden. But now with the snow, especially with a bit of snow on the side and snow everywhere, it all just jumps out and it looks like a painting. It's like you're walking through big, thick, daubed, painted trees, you know.
Yeah.
So I was getting all excited again, like, oh my God, I've got to get into painting again. You know, it's fucking gorgeous out here.
Yeah.
So I get it, and yeah, that there's something about it's like it's probably something beginners get excited about, but it's like painting water in a glass or snow, where when you really look at something like that, you see that it's made up of all these unexpected colors.
Mm.
And then, you know, when you actually then start applying those colors, you get this incredible effect, which, yeah, I know you get excited by that. I it's
That's my thing.
porn.
That's my thing. It's what I do.
I get it. I get it. It's so exciting. It really is. So I'm
Yeah.
kind of, but I'm the world's sort of biggest procrastinator, because I know I've been talking about getting into painting for like 2 years now, and I've still not got there. But it's there.
Right.
It keeps coming back. It keeps coming back. So we'll see.
Okay. Here's a tip. Get a really small board, canvas covered board, and work on that. Something really so small that whatever you produce is going to be insignificant.
So I won't be disappointed then.
Because
Okay.
otherwise disappointment is sort of inevitable. Because I take all these photos of the snow and everything, and it's beautiful. I actually have no idea how I'm going to paint that. I've got no idea what it's going to turn out like. I just sort of know that I want to have a go at it, and not to make it look exactly the way I'm seeing it, but just to maybe feel the way it feels. There are some amazing paintings by Alfred Sisley, who was the English impressionist, a nice English name, Alfred Sisley. And I first copied one of his paintings when I was at school, and I was 16, and it was called Floods at Port Marley. And he was the only sort of well-known English impressionist who was working in France, and he did a series of snow paintings, which you just look at them and you have that audio sense of when the snow's so thick that sound doesn't travel. Just to look, it's like a synesthetic. I think that's what it's called, synesthetic experience, where you look at it, but the sound in your whole inner audio world changes. They're really worth looking at.
I'll check those out. I don't know those either. Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually started painting a painting of you, Tim.
Have you?
I'm not going to show it to you either.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, this must be from those photographs we did a while back.
That's right. I'll tell you this though, it's big.
It's big. Was he a Greek or a Roman god, a blacksmith or something?
That's right. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was Greek, even though he's Hephaestus. Hephaestus. Yeah, even though it's a US at the end. I believe he's a Greek god, and was indeed a blacksmith and the inventor of workshops and production from workshops. He's the archetypal person who works in a shed. He's where all men spring from, this man in a shed.
Yeah, the man in the shed.
With a fire.
The archetype, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, he stole the fire from the gods. No, he didn't. Somebody else did that, but...
yes, I think he may have been in... Well, no, I think he may have...
He was on the receiving end of stolen goods, perhaps.
Yeah, he fenced the fire.
Yeah.
No, I think it was stolen from him, actually. Possibly. I'll check that. My mythology is not complete. Robert Graves will tell us.
Yeah, he's the man.
Yeah. So, what did you want to talk about?
Well, there was talk of the Enneagram, Keith, which you've been getting into in a quite serious way, it seems, for a while now. So
yes,
maybe let's start by talking about what drew you into it. Why did you start to get interested?
Yes, the Enneagram. So some people have heard of it, clearly. Some people will go, what does that word mean? Or how do you spell it? Enneagram. And I think it's a diagram of 9 points. 9 points, really. I know we're going to have a sort of diagram in a moment. But what drew me into it, I think it was that someone else I knew was studying this thing called the Enneagram, which is a way of looking, broadly, simply, it's a way of looking at personality, human personality. I studied psychology at university, and my interest in psychology and spirituality go together. And they also go together with my writing, which is involved in script writing and creating characters. And so whenever I was involved in creating characters, in a way, I've always needed a model of how to understand character. Mm. And that feels like a very big subject. When I was at university studying psychology, there was this section, if you like, called personality, and there were lots of theories of personality, and they involved Jung or different archetypal things that we just mentioned as well. But I wanted a system that I could use for writing characters, because it answers the question, in what ways are we all different? Clearly, we're different psychologically, but is it that there are thousands of different types of us all, or are there a certain number of types? And there have been different systems over the years, including astrology is a way of understanding personality. There have been Jung's approaches. There's been the MBTI, Myers-Briggs type indicator, which gets used in business settings, I think. And someone talked about the Enneagram, initially probably as an extension or a subset of Gurdjieff's teachings.
Okay.
Because Gurdjieff, who was an Armenian mystic teacher who came from the Caucasus through Russia to Paris and to London, and had a following, and there are still Gurdjieff groups, and I was very interested in Gurdjieff for a long time. And the idea about the Enneagram, this way of understanding the ways in which we are different and what it is, given that we may be a specific type of person, what is our individual work? Because I think when one encounters the idea of spiritual or psychological progress, we go, where do we start? What am I meant to be doing to make progress on myself, to develop myself, to get over the stuff that I've got? And there may be a feeling that we're attempting to sort of do everything. We have to solve all our problems all at once in some way. And the Enneagram is different in that it says, well, you are fundamentally one type of person, though you have aspects of potentially the other 8, but in different ways. And it's a very dynamic model that says, okay, so you're fundamentally one of these, but you also move to other places within the diagram where you express different parts of yourself in stress, or when you're in a very comfortable state, you may go to another place. And so I'm currently writing a book called 5 Journeys in the Enneagram, which describes the way that we move around this whole map of personality. I feel that it's something that can go as deep as one wants to go with it. It can be used very superficially. I know that it's getting used in business and in employing people. It can to some extent be used in what is, I believe, is called dating and in relationships, and interpersonal stuff at work can certainly be helped through an understanding of different types of people. Now, I completely accept that a lot of people will resist this idea that there are just 9 types of people. And it isn't really saying there are just 9 types of people. It's saying there are 9 fundamental types, and we embody that, but we also embody a lot of aspects of the other ones as well.
So is the idea that we basically have like a center of gravity around one type, and then we're kind of coloured by different degrees of some of the other types, or
Yeah,
potentially all of the other types to certain degrees or in certain situations.
that's a very good description. Yes, it is. I'd say we have a place where we go in stress, which isn't our natural type. We have a place where we, if you will, go back to when we're in a comfortable state, which is really our journey of what you might call integration, where we are headed on a what one might call a spiritual journey or a journey of progress back to another point. Um, and then we have what are called wings. They're the ones next to us. Um, so we might sort of lean into one, or we might lean into the next one. Shall we bring up the slide? And that might be helpful because it's very easy to get very abstract.
Yeah. So which one do you want first?
Um, we'll just focus on the one that
Tell me
we,
the words. Which word is at the top?
I
And then
think it says peacemaker.
peacemaker. Let's have a look. Here we are. Is that
That's the one. Yeah.
does
And
it look big enough to you?
yeah, that's great.
Cool.
So it says down the bottom left, Riso and Hudson names. The 9 points around this diagram get named slightly differently by different authors. And there are a lot of books, very good books around, fantastic books about the Enneagram. And it's an area of study where people are continuing to evolve the understanding and knowledge around it, although there's already a huge amount. And these guys, Riso and Hudson, have written one of the best books in this territory, which I'm going to hold up, called The Wisdom of the Enneagram, which I think is the most approachable and helpful of if one is starting off wanting to understand a bit more about it. Shall I do a quick whiz around the types?
Yeah. So tell us
Yeah.
about them.
So we'll start at number one. The reformer, sometimes called the idealist, is someone who seeks to improve the world. So I think what I'll aim to do here is to say what each type's fundamental aim is and what some of their challenges are likely to be. So the reformer really wants to make the world a better place and wants to play their role in making the world a better place. So maybe in politics or activism, they are driven by ideas about how life can be better. On the downside, this means that they can be critical of other ways, both out there in the world, but also can be quite critical of themselves. So that can be an issue. The number two, the helper. You'll find a lot of helpers in roles such as medicine, nursing, sometimes in customer service, sometimes in entertainment, but mostly in those sort of helping, healing type roles, offering help and love and support to other people. They sometimes feel underappreciated, and that can lead them to feel resentful that the world doesn't want the help they have to offer. Number three, the achiever, someone who's generally driven by success, performance, that can be money or just status, and they can be a little bit, how can I say, they're so focused on wanting to achieve their own drives and aims that their relationships become a little bit secondary to their goals. So, and people can feel a little bit used by them. Number four, the individualist, sometimes called the tragic romantic. This is where you find the poets, the novelists, the artists, sometimes people who want to express the deepest parts of life. They're the people who journey to the underworld on the rest of the world's behalf to discover and bring back the truths about life, which may be dark and melancholy, but may also be very joyful. They often wear clothing that's very individual. They are very much themselves and want to be seen as there's only one me, I'm the only one like this. But very, very interesting people often. The investigator at number 5 is someone often called the observer, someone who may look a little bit like they're outside of life, looking in. They're quite data oriented. They're very good at analyzing situations and getting to the truth of situations. So it's quite a detective aspect to the investigator, a bit of Sherlock Holmes functioning there. They process data a lot around other people, possibly, but also around what might be quite mathematical or abstract things. So they can have a tendency to turn life into a set of rather abstract data. The loyalist at number 6, the loyal skeptic, sometimes called, or also the devil's advocate, is someone who very much likes to support others. Very good within an organization where there is perhaps a strong leadership and that they can get behind, and that they can feel that they're making a contribution by being part of a system. That can be as a result of a kind of slightly existential fear about life and a certain pessimism about life. That's their challenge, if you like. Number 7, the enthusiast or the epicure, someone who lives for the highs of life, someone who is driven by experiences that keep them high. They might be liking to jump out of airplanes with parachutes, or even no parachutes, but they certainly like some adrenaline fueled aspects to life, and they are driven by the notion of fun and excitement. These are the drivers. What happens for them sometimes is that because they don't like to look at the negative sides of life, because they're keeping themselves high a lot of the time, it means they find themselves a little challenged when it comes to looking at their interior life and what needs to be done to progress. And they can be a bit scattered in that process. They can be a little scattered generally, but they're certainly very lively and full of life, if you will. Number 8, the challenger, sometimes also called the boss or authority, often in positions of either of leadership themselves, leading organizations, or even countries, if you will. If they're not leading the country, they'll be leading the rebellion. They will take a leadership role to overcome the existing authority and bring in their own leadership. They feel a strong responsibility for the quality of life, a little bit like in the way of the reformer, but they're a little bit more people of action and sort of team building. You often know when you've met an 8 because you have a sense that they're testing you out as to whether you are with them or against them. It can be quite uncomfortable for you as a recipient of that experience, because it is really my way or the highway for them. If you're not going to be with them, there's a sense you may not be of any use to them. So we come to the last one, number 9, the peacemaker or mediator. Very much exactly what the title says. They will seek peace, and I remember having a teacher of mediation who was a 9 peacemaker, really genuinely wanting people to get on, for there to be harmony amongst all of us, to find ways to resolve our conflict, and to have a nice, comfortable life. And why can't we all just get on? They avoid conflict, which is not always a good thing, because sometimes a situation may need a little bit of conflict to move forward. they sometimes also can be a little bit attracted to zoning out, if you will, through various mediums. So they can become a little passive, but very lovely people in many ways, as all of them are. So I hope that little trip around the Enneagram gave a sense of, it's very much a positive drive for each of the types, and each type also has various challenges that they face in their interior life, which are genuinely often actually quite existential and quite deep. And although I've given a very basic assessment of the picture of all nine, the description of each type, I could go on for a long time, and there are lots has been written about the depths of each type and what helps them, what their journey is, because once one say is willing to accept that, okay, I've read all about these different types, and finally I realize that I am, in my case, let's say, a 5. That is what I am. Now the next question would be, okay, what if you like is my level of health at that level? Where do I sit on the ladder of being a 5? Am I down the bottom where I'm completely lost in data, or am I using my investigatory, observing qualities to bring some new area of life to the benefit of other people, to show some area in a new way and increase knowledge about a particular subject for the benefit of all? So this is not a fixed thing. Everything in the Enneagram is dynamic. We're always moving around it. We're always moving up and down. So although we look at this diagram as a 2-dimensional diagram, I like to think of it, if you can imagine, it's really a cake, and the round thing, we're looking at a cake from the top, and there is, if you like, a ladder for each of these types, and we are somewhere on the level of health, and we move up and down that at different times. We can make progress and become more liberated from our own type, because actually one of the things I would say about it is it's a map of compulsions. It's a map of the things that are limiting us within our type, as well as telling us what our journey is. So I'll stop there.
Tell me about, why is there this green triangle in the middle? Why are these 3 connected by this green triangle?
Yeah, I will say something about that. The 9, I'll come to that directly, but the 9 types divide into 3 basic types. So 8, 9, and 1 are all what I'd call sensing types. They tend to work more through body awareness. They sense whether something is right or not right. In the Gurdjieff teachings, which isn't the only teaching that talks about Enneagram, but in the Gurdjieff teachings, he talks about the 3-brained being. So we have 3 brains. We have an intellectual brain that we know about. We have an emotional brain in the heart, if you will, and we have a sensing brain in somewhere around our solar plexus, perhaps somewhere further down. So we are 3-brained beings, and the 9 Enneagram types are broken down into those 3. So 8, 9, and 1 is the sensing gut types at the top. 2, 3, and 4 are the emotional feeling types, and 7, 5, 6, and 7 are the thinking types. So what you have in that triangle at 3, 6, and 9 are the absolute centers of those 3 brains.
Okay.
So the peacemaker is at the middle, if you like, of the sensing type. The 3 is at the middle of the emotional types, and the 6, the loyalist, is the most thinky of the thinking types. there is an idea that once upon a time, further back in our evolution, there was only the triangle, that we were either one of the three, and that the ones in between are a sort of adaptation, if you will. So if you take number one, the reformer, yes, they're within the sensing gut body type, but they're leaning a bit more towards the feeling world of the 2, 3, and the 4, and so on. The 2 is within the feeling type, but is leaning up there towards the sensing type. So we are combinations of these 3 different brains, if you like, and we function using those brains either appropriately or inappropriately. Gurdjieff talked about the harmonious development of man, meaning really in his case that while we may start as a purely say a purely thinking type, if you just concentrate on getting good at, even better, let's say, at thinking, and if you neglect your feeling world and your sensing world, you will become an even more exaggerated version of yourself as time goes on and as you get older. So there is a notion around the Enneagram that it's giving you a potential map for balancing your different brains to be a more harmonious version. And that, for me, is one of the journeys. That's only one of the journeys within the Enneagram that one can take.
So from each position, so from 1, which, I mean, I feel like 1 and 4 are the strongest that I recognize in myself from what you've described so far. So, but if you take 1 from each brain, so that's why enthusiast is connected to 1 and individualist. Is that right? So I've got my gut intelligence, heart intelligence, and head intelligence.
That is true for the 1. It's also true for the 8. It's also true for the 3, 6, and the 9. It's not actually true for the 4 and the 5.
Yeah, why is that? Why is there not a line here?
Yeah, there just isn't. I cannot tell you how this diagram was evolved. It goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. The most original source appears to be something called the Salmon Brotherhood, which was a Sufi sect, probably before Christ, before the time of Christ. Maybe not, I may have got that wrong historically, but they were a pretty exclusive sect who practiced Sufism, who did sacred dances, some of which were done literally on this diagram was on the ground, and they would dance between the points as part of their sacred dances or movements. And this was something that Gurdjieff took on later. You can see these dances being done in a film called Meetings with Remarkable Men.
Yeah, I've seen
it. By Peter Brook.
I've seen it. It's a great film. I remember actually, it's the first film I ever, because we were very kind of reticent about films and things with our kids when they were growing up. We were very much about a slow start. But I do remember playing the beginning of that film to Gracie when she was a baby, very small. You know, where they all gather to hear that music that's going to like crack open the universe or whatever, that's going to echo through the hills.
Yeah.
I remember playing that, and you know, we were both completely transfixed by that opening sequence. But tell me, so you say you identify with number 5 here.
Yeah.
So that means what? This triangle between 5, 8, and 7.
Yeah.
Is primary for you, but then there's no feeling part to that. But I see you're someone I very much think of as having, you know, the heart, you know, in quite a sort of strong. There's a strong presence of heart I get from you.
Thank you. Well,
how does that fit with this?
Yeah, how does that fit? Well, the answer to that is really that for a long time, I wasn't sure whether I was a 4 or a 5. And eventually I settled that I was fundamentally a 5. But more important than these dynamics that you're talking about, perhaps more important, is the idea of the wings. So on either side of our main type, so on either side of mine, which is number 5, there is 4, the individualist, and on the other side, 6, the loyalist. Now, generally speaking, people tend to lean into one of their wings more than the other one. So they will spend some time in their wings, which can be a good thing, especially when the compulsive aspects of their own type are threatening to be quite strong and even not overtake someone, but to be negative for them, that they can go into being one of their wings. So for me, that meant that I spent a lot of time over in 4 when I was writing my books. Or writing poetry. I've been involved with the Enneagram for since 2004, so 17 years, and it's become a conscious thing that I shift my consciousness into number 4 to write songs or write poetry or write particularly fiction, because that's where I acknowledge, that's where all that heart feeling world is for me, and that's my closest place to access it. So that's always felt quite natural. On the other side, I have the 6, which is the place of fear and loyalty, but I spend less time there than I do at 4. So the wings are probably more accessible, generally speaking, than the triangle that you're talking about, that is basically the lines that are emanating from your own point to these other 2 points. So for me, I go to 7. These have directions of both stress and integration. Oh. And the order of them is 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7 for the non-triangle ones, and for the triangle, it's 9, 6, 3 is the direction of stress, and the other direction, the opposite direction, is the direction of integration. I'm getting very technical
well,
here.
I got confused there. So start with one example. So
I go from 5. In fact, we can bring up that other one with the arrows on it. It's not very good resolution, but let's bring it up anyway.
This one.
Yeah. So actually, these arrows, as we see them here, take you all around both the triangle and also the other part of the Enneagram, the strange diagram. So you were mentioning from 1, you see the arrow coming into 1 from 7 and the one going down to 4.
Yeah.
These arrows are actually the direction of stress. So when we're stressed, we move in the direction of these arrows. So the 1 goes to 4, the 4 goes to 2, the 2 goes to 8, the 8 goes to 5, the 5 goes to 7, 7 goes to 1.
Okay.
And then on the triangle, the 9 goes to 6, and the 6 goes to 3, and back 3 goes to 9. And those are the directions of stress. That's what they're generally known as. So when we experience difficult moments, we don't necessarily stay where we are. We may go to a different place and experience some of the downsides of being that other stress place. So for me, if I'm a 5, I go to 7. And one of the things with 7 is that 7's like kind of excitement and fun and distraction in a way. So during some of my more stressful times in the past, I want to, like when the snow comes, this is what I did as a teenager. When the snow came, I would take my motorcycle and ride it all over the golf course, as an example. So,
why? Because you were stressed.
Well, that may not be a terrific example, but it's when people when fives are stressed, they will tend to take more risk. They will do more risky behavior at seven. So that's a stress direction. And
Yeah, because I'm thinking in my case, because I think this perfectionist sadly fits me quite well.
right,
And I do recognize this tendency to be romantic, or
mm,
that's where my sort of self-indulgent self-pity
mm-hmm,
lives for sure.
yeah,
And there's a kind of glamour, there's a dark glamour to it, which,
yeah,
now that I'm older, I can resist it more. But when I was
mm,
younger, I would dive into this place for sure.
yeah,
That seems very very strong to me. But
yeah.
so tell me, but then is there a possibility of being in one, getting stressed, going to four, and continuing to there, or not? It's just that's the
No,
place that person goes. That's
yeah,
the place that, yeah, okay.
yeah. That doesn't continue
No, no, no.
likely
It's
in that
just
way.
that's their relationship.
Yeah, that's right.
So
So
what is the relationship in the opposite way then?
so seven, for the one's relationship to seven, um, that I call the journey of integration. That is the positive progress model for the one
So
is to
this
get
is where
is to go to what one might call the high side or the evolved side of seven, and that means
I'm trying to get to.
yeah,
By
it's where kind of where your soul is wishing to be at the high healthy side of seven, and that what that means in practice, the high side of seven is loving life, and for the perfectionist has often been feels so disappointed by life, and that it doesn't match up to their ideals. Um, that it's become very disappointing, and that the world and people will never really get it together to live this world, live this life as it could be lived, and it's really disappointing. And at some point, the one has to forgive the world for its failings and its flaws. And I call that journey from one back to seven falling in love with life again
mm.
and forgiving life for all its flaws, accepting its flaws, and appreciating just the joys of life.
Well, this is so. I mean, it's so timely at this point in my life that you say this, because this all makes total sense to me now. This The perfectionist has this vision of the world which they imagine is what's over here, in a way, that they're
Right.
always trying to make the world into this, but it's not actually there. It doesn't exist in the world. It's a vision for the world that can't exist. And the acceptance of the world is where they'll get the same sense of joy and satisfaction and pleasure in being alive
Mm,
with the world as it actually is, rather than how they would like it to be. And
absolutely.
this is a really powerful thing for me to hear right now, because that makes
Mm,
complete sense.
mm,
I do feel like that's where I'm at now, is kind of reconciling, the vision that I held was an impossible vision. I can still aim towards bringing some aspects of that vision into being as
yeah.
part of an expression, but it has to be very much based in what's possible in this world.
Mm,
And really, the pleasure that's here is what I seek. I totally see that.
mm,
And I do access it often, the
mm,
joy of being alive, and
yeah.
all of those things. So yeah, that is really interesting. And then the trap is here, and at the
Yeah.
same time as
That's right.
I'm kind of giving up the impossible vision, I'm also giving up the indulgence,
Yeah.
falling into the romantic hole when it doesn't
Yeah.
go my way.
That's
You
right.
know, I think for the first time, recently I've actually not fallen down that hole at a moment where I would normally have fallen in. I've actually been able to see that hole and
Mm.
walk around it for the first time. So
Well, that's great,
yeah,
and part of this learning about this. I know it looks very abstract on screen and so on, but learning this this model, if you like, is about self-awareness, really. So yeah, if you know, oh, that's where I go when when things go badly, that's where I end up going. That's just a pattern. It's not a necessary pattern, but before it becomes an unnecessary pattern, one may have to watch it a few times, watch it happening from a disinterested or a disengaged place to say, oh look, that's what I do, rather than oh it is true, this is real, this is how life is.
yeah.
But to actually see that it's a pattern and to disengage from identifying with it, and that's part of the journey is disidentifying and just seeing that, well, we are this type, and these are our tendencies, and these are our compulsions, and these are where we want to go. And health is a measure of the extent to which we're not governed by our compulsions.
So is there a sense in which this position can be integrated as well in a healthy way, or is that just where you go? Is there a healthy version of the romantic for someone who's
For the
centered
one,
on the perfect?
that's a really good question. I think ultimately there is. If it's not compulsive, because I think when one as one evolves on one's other journeys, if you like, then all of these places become accessible. The high sides of all of these places become accessible in a non-compulsive, genuinely chosen way.
Okay.
And and that's an aim, if you will. That's somewhere to wish for. Um, we live with this notion that we're choosing our states a lot of the time. Someone asked me a question recently. Do I do it was phrased, do you choose happiness or disillusionment? And which I had to think about for a long time. And there's a sense in which well, we may not exactly choose either of those things, but we wish for and can work for happiness, and disillusionment is a kind of compulsion. It's being a victim of, if in the negative sense of the word disillusionment, it's giving into a compulsively negative view of life, which is the kind of thing you experience at 4 when it's tragically romantic. I'm so disillusioned with life, and even ones can be disillusioned with life. So there is a sense in which we have to choose something, and maybe we are choosing our own progress, and we're doing that through awareness of ourselves. And it's a little bit like the message over the oracle at Delphi, know thyself. And for me, the Enneagram has offered the best model of how the self works, of where we start from, where we go to, where our compulsions are, what our particular work is. Because one of the great things for me about this model is it says, as I said earlier, we don't have to work on everything. If we know who we are in this model, it sort of tells us what our work is. It narrows it. It narrows our spiritual and psychological work down to quite a large extent, so that we are able to bring our awareness to quite specific things, and to work on them, and to understand what's going on in us in a more objective way, so we can just see it.
So what the question that comes up for me is,
Mm.
what makes a person center around one of these positions?
Mm.
Is there some kind of has there been any thought or investigation into why am I a perfectionist?
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
because
It's,
I can see in my own story reasons for this.
yeah.
So I'm wondering, is it something to do with initial conditions in your life that kind of throw you into one of these centers?
Mm. There are different views about this, and if you read,
Shall I bring us back for a bit? Do we need the diagram still, or
uh,
we can always come back?
yeah, I'm quite happy to keep it just for the moment. I know
Oh,
it's not quite as clear visually, but
it's all right.
we might need to refer to it.
Is
Um,
is this the best image for now?
yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
That's
so
fine.
carry on. Sorry, I interrupted.
That's all right. I mean, it's a really fascinating question as to if we accept, for instance, that we are one specific type, which I do. Um, why would that be? And there are people who say within the Enneagram, people who study this, there are people who say, well, it's the result of early conditioning, um, maybe even as early as pre-birth, in the womb. Maybe we had an original wounding that led to a specifically existential state, which led to us taking up this particular lens on life, because each of the types is a particular lens on life, a particular worldview, if you like. But there are other people who would say, well, we choose this before birth. It's if we say accept reincarnation, maybe we choose this time we're going to be, an observer. I'm going to be an observer and work in on this type this time round. Maybe I've been a number two last time, and an eight before that, and a three before that. Whatever. Um, and that this time we've chosen this. There are some very good books about uh, children and the Enneagram. There's one very good one about how to parent different Enneagrammatic type children, which is clearly based on the idea that we are a particular type from very early on. Not necessarily to say that that doesn't happen in early life, but that that typing is established early on. Having said that, there are people who say that our genuine Enneagrammatic type isn't fully locked in until the early 20s, maybe late teens, early 20s. My own experience says that of children, I would say it's quite possible to tell what certain children are type-wise, and that I think it's pretty unlikely that they're going to change, but that they will show that through their whole life, and that they will be working with that set of challenges and opportunities all through their life. So the jury is a little bit out on that whole question.
So the other question is, do people ever swap positions in their life?
Mm. Well, I don't. My own view is probably not. But even if you are a particular type, you can, for instance, get very stuck at your stress point.
Right.
So a nine mediator may actually be very stuck at 6 in fear.
Yeah.
Um,
But not sort of change to a completely different one like 7 or something.
no, very unlikely. I mean, people can a little bit live in their wings, because that's safer, but that's less. I'd say that's less sort of permanent, really, than the possibility of living in their stress point, which can go on for quite long periods of time. And they may mistake themselves for being the person at the stress point.
Right. Right. Yeah, I could see how that would happen. So what is the relationship with the wings That's less clear to me.
Okay. Well, the wings, it's often, I've heard people say that there is salvation in the wings, meaning that um, there are qualities in the wing, in our wing types, that can soften or give us some relief, if you will, from some of the difficult aspects of our main type. So if we're suffering slightly from our main type, uh, let's say for me as the observer, there are times when I can get lost in data, sort of factual data about things. And actually, I may benefit from going into the feeling world of four. And I certainly experience that creatively, definitely.
Yeah.
That's where I function a lot of the time creatively is in four. So for me, that has been a great kind of solace. The beauty of it for me is that, and I think this is true of the winged, when one travels to one's wing type, one doesn't experience the full difficulties of that type. So I very much acknowledge that not type fours have very specific, quite difficult aspects to their lives. They can be very lonely, isolated in their individualism. Um, they can really feel that life is a terrible tragedy and that their own life is a tragedy. Now when I moved
Yeah,
to
I know how that one goes.
right, but if you're a five and you move to four, it doesn't have that whole emotional, energetic weight to it. It's just, oh, it's great to feel things deeply. It's lovely to be able to really get into feelings and to know what that's like. But you don't have that heaviness that you can't get out of it. It's desperate and
Sure.
really, really difficult. So I'm slightly less aware of how I benefit from my six-ish wing, but I don't experience myself as spending a huge amount of time there. But there is that. Can you identify with that if you're saying that you are a one and this is very much a self-selecting model? It's not. In
Yeah.
general, it's always thought we're not told what we are.
Yeah.
It's not like astrology where you're I'm a Virgo and you're a whatever. This is a self-selecting model. We part of the first journey, if you like, is to find out what I am. And for me, that took quite a long time. Some people get it immediately and go, I'm definitely a number three, definitely no question. And that's it. That's fixed for the rest of their life. For some people, it takes longer, and that's a journey in itself. But I would just so if you're saying you feel that you are a one, can you
Definitely.
can you feel something of the nine and something of the two that you lean
Yeah,
into
it's
that?
interesting that you say this because I feel like they're like allies or guides.
Mm,
Because when I think about my own experience, when I've fallen into the four, these two wings are ways I can get out of it.
mm,
And like that example you said, when it can be such an intensely lonely place, that
mm,
creative, individualistic, the
mm.
world doesn't understand me, blah
Yeah,
blah blah.
yeah.
But then going to number two, like giving to people, like giving to the world, is a great way to come out of that and to
Mm,
come back to the world. And I've definitely had experiences like that.
mm,
And I also feel, in the more positive sense, going to seven, that there is an aspect of me that does want to give, that's
yeah,
really, and finds great kind of joy in that.
yeah,
I think about the times when I've hosted these incredible
yeah.
events with people or workshops, all the times that I've kind of really given something and I felt such a deep sense of satisfaction and joy. And
Mm,
I'm not at the center, and it's not about me, and it's not
mm,
everybody. I can almost be invisible, but I facilitated something,
mm,
and it's so deeply satisfying. And in the same way, I think the mediator, I have this, and this very much ties in with Aikido, which I practice. I feel like that's like a practice of mediation in a way, because it's this ability to take whatever's going on, either it's lots of different viewpoints in conflict, or it's direct conflict with me. I can take this neutral position where I'm not pulled into it and I'm not rejecting it, where I can take that energy and neutralize it and use it in some good way. Or I can offer a very a different perspective on a situation of conflict between two other people, say,
Right.
without being pulled in. I mean, these are things I really recognize
Yeah.
as experiences I've had, and that they do feel like parts of me that are not in the center, but they're there.
Mm.
So that's why this idea of allies comes up, like they're almost, these, yeah, that makes sense. I mean,
That's good.
I don't know. I mean, it's easy, I guess, when you're presented with a model or a picture like this, and you have an imagination. It's easy to kind of fit it in as well.
Mm.
But I see it. I mean, I do. I see
Mm.
it, and I wonder if there are places on the circle which I don't have any sense of connection with
Mm.
when I look at them,
Mm.
and the lines aren't touching that. So
Yeah.
like performer. I'm
Uh-huh.
so not a performer
Mm.
either. I mean, we were talking before about music. Like, I think one of the reasons why I didn't continue with music was that this kind of the attention of being a performer was so overwhelming for me.
Mm. Mm.
It wasn't something I could ever get into a comfortable place, or certainly not yet. So I look at something like that and it feels very alien.
Yes.
Um, but then I look at something like Protector.
Yes.
Maybe I could see there's a bit that's not so alien to me.
Okay.
But I wonder then, this idea of that being the kind of the physical, the sort of
Yeah.
gut intelligence, which is it's interesting that I'm sort of, according to this, I'm more in the gut area and the heart,
Yeah.
and that really does feel like me.
Yeah.
The intellectual, even though I do have a kind of relationship with it, it's not somewhere that I choose to be. I'm more comfortable in the body and the heart, for
Mm.
sure.
Yeah.
That's something I relate to from what you said.
Yeah. That's very interesting. What you were saying there about your hosting of these events, which I'm aware of, for me that feels both a sort of seven type wish for fun and for joy of life, but also that would be a typical thing for a nine to create a sort of harmonious setting for a lot of people, where it's about the facilitation for other people, not being in the limelight particularly necessarily, but
Yeah.
just being the person who allows it to happen between other people,
Okay. Well,
and in a generous, selfless way. And that's very typical of the nine.
yeah, that makes sense then. So yeah, so it's more, maybe it's even more that than the giver then, in fact.
Well,
Yeah.
it's, yeah, sometimes the same situation can bring out aspects from different places, if you will, if that makes sense. So one can set up a particular situation. One is drawn to create a certain situation that allows you to express a lot of different things. I mean, your home situation, I can see how that allows you to express your, if you will, your idealism.
Mm.
Um, but it also, I'm also aware that it gives you the opportunity to give to your children and to nurture them, and to, the number two place, the giver. It's very much about nurturing and giving of that love and getting more into that feeling world. And also that you've used your place to set up these experiences at nine. So a specific situation can bring out various parts of your qualities that you want to develop, more of, and our conditions give us some of the impulses, as well as them coming from inside ourselves, but we choose these conditions because they, unconsciously or consciously, we know that they help us grow.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you talk about the giver there as well, because with my girls, as a parent, because of my situation, I'm divorced and they're half the time with their mother, half the time with me. But when they're with me, I am their mother. I mean, I really feel like I'm almost more mother than father. I have a very mothering instinct, and that kind of relates to this with them. That's almost kind of, there is a sort of more authoritarian, boundary setting, masculine father side, but I think I'm more dominant, or what dominates me more as a parent with them when it's just the three of us is me being this mother, this giver, and it's very much the heart.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
got that nurturing quality. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot of, obviously, there's a lot of heart at two.
And when yeah, and when I fuck up as a parent, I go right into the like romantic horror zone as well. you know.
Well, the more we sort of say, oh yeah, that's where I've gone on the map.
Yeah.
We
Pull
can,
out, pull back,
yeah,
pull
quick,
back.
okay, go back, go back, go back,
Yeah.
and think, yeah, because so part of the antidote, if you will, to that journey to stress is that we focus back on where we want the journey to go, which is to forgiving life, forgiving ourselves, moving towards falling back in love with life at 7. That's the real journey. That's the important journey. And those trips, as a parent, I call them trips rather than journeys. The trips, the little laybys to the stress point, become fewer and fewer over time.
Yeah.
Because we're in our more major journey of going to our place of integration.
Yeah.
But people sometimes talk about wingtips as well. Sort of. So for you, the wingtips would be at 8 and 3. So we might stretch our way around and experience a bit of 8ishness and a bit of 3ishness, but not as powerfully as 9 and 2.
Well, this is interesting, given what I said about being a performer, because there is also a very much a part of my shadow is a desire to be that, I think.
Do you dream of being Ozzy Osbourne?
Well, the reason I say that, I can't, it's, I don't think your microphone is working. I think it's
Oh,
your
okay.
computer one, because when you move forward or move your hand, the sound gets shut off.
Oh, right.
And that
Okay. I'll
suggests
speak
to
in.
me that
I'll
it's,
speak into the computer.
well, no, it's fine. It's just sometimes when you block it
Yeah.
with anything, it goes quiet. But yeah, so when I watch Bob Dylan on one of those Scorsese documentaries, he is so like the golden shadow for me. Like I identify so deeply with this person and feel like that's who I want to be. Him in all his confidence, doing his thing, very much a performer, in that unique way of his. So I know that that's deep down in me, like buried in there, even though it terrifies me and I'm
Yeah.
totally self-conscious and uncomfortable and nervous.
Ah, I tell you what's interesting to me there is that if when I think about Bob Dylan, I might be drawn to the idea that he's actually he's an idealistic type one. That yes, of course he performs, but that the driving impulse for him has been to create a better world and to be that voice of activism and idealism about the better world. So maybe you're identifying with him more as that. Clearly, he has to perform that, but then maybe that's what activists have to do. Politicians have to speak up and so on. It's that being in the world. Performing means being in the world, being seen, being visible, and there's a sense in which maybe all of the types have to make themselves visible and perform their role. So it's just a question. I think that the thing with the Enneagram is for me, it continually throws up questions. There's never a kind of full answer. The answer always leads to another question, and the question leads to a partial answer, and the partial answer leads to another question. And that's why I find it endlessly fascinating, really.
Yeah, because there's plenty of scope for interpretation, or there's room for lots of subtlety and layers.
Yeah.
It's more almost like it's got a kind of metaphorical power. It's not like a bit of science that's so definite and absolute.
No,
Of course, it wouldn't work if it was. And I think that's probably where the power of a lot of these systems and maps of reality and experience come from. Or a lot of the power is in the fact that they're not nailing anything down. They're just kind of focusing things in such a way that it's useful.
Yeah. The way that the Enneagram has developed in the modern times, if you like, since the 60s and 70s, has been through what are called, I believe, usually panels, where people who understand themselves as a specific type will record, in front of people. They will explain or tell about their experience of being, for instance, a 5. In these situations, I experience this. In these situations, I find that I go to this place. And so knowledge has grown experientially in that way. And clearly, one type 5 person's experience is not going to be the same as another type 5 person as experience, because they may be at a different level of if you like, psychological health or spiritual involvement. They may spend more time in stress, or more time on their integration journey, more time in their wings. And there's another dimension that we haven't even spoken about, which are called subtypes, which I haven't got a diagram for. But it's the idea that and it's sort of separate to all the types, really, but that we are one of 3 different subtypes, those being self-preservatory, which I'll explain in a moment, social, or a one-to-one type. So this is to do with our preference in the way that we relate to it's actually to our survival. And that means if you go to a party, you will see the 3 different subtypes operating. There will be people who are self-preservatory, who will be concerned with where their next food is coming from, where they're going to spend the night. They'll be literally in the kitchen at parties, close to the fridge, near the cheese and pineapple. And so long as they've got that, then they feel safe. And then there are others who like to be in a social group, so they'll all be talking, 4 or 5 people all together, socially talking and feeling the security of that grouping. And then there are others, which I would put myself in this category, who are one-to-one. They like the engagement and the intensity of the one-to-one experience, and that's what they will always go for. When I go to a party, it's not how many people did I speak to, it's what was the quality of a single conversation that I had with one person. And sometimes at parties, other people come in and you think, no, I just want to speak to one person.
Yeah.
And this is quite it's a big thing in relationships. Compatibility of this kind in relationships is really important, because if you are a social type of person, sometimes one other person doesn't feel enough. And I'm a one-to-one person, and when I'm with a social person, I sometimes get the feeling that they'd like there to be someone else there. So it makes you feel quite inadequate, because they're thinking, it'd be great.
Keith,
It'd be great if
this all sounds very familiar. I think I'm definitely a one-to-one person in a party too, but I'm also by the fridge.
Right, yeah.
Usually by the back door, ready to like escape.
Right.
Looking for the exits.
Go back to your cave. And,
Yeah. So
the fire by the cave.
one or the other is either the intense conversation nailing someone to the wall, like
Right.
having a real deep connection with someone,
Which
or
is what we're doing now.
yeah, or getting the fuck out, or
Right.
being like uncomfortable and thinking, I'm gonna, I'm gonna have to leave if I can't find someone to get
Yeah.
latched onto in that way.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I remember explaining this to someone I know pretty well, and and they said, "Oh my gosh, that's why I feel so uncomfortable with that person at work, because they're social and I'm one to one. That they're continually, they want someone else to be there, and I just feel so like I'm not enough
Yeah,
for
yeah,
them.
yeah.
I'm just not enough for them." And I have been in a relationship with a social type of person, and it is quite, it can be quite challenging.
Yeah, me
But
too.
it's really important in a dating context to understand that,
Mm,
and to have compatibility around that. I'd say that's almost, there's compatibility within the types of Enneagram people, but there's also compatibility with these subtypes. And also it means that if you combine the subtypes with the basic Enneagram types, you've got three. You can be either a social nine, a one-to-one nine, or a self-pres nine. So, okay, so there are three types of nine. So there are 27 types really. And then each of those would prefer one wing to the other. So then you've got, 54 types. And then there's the levels of health. So the idea that there are only 9 types is soon blown out of the water, because there are lots of subtleties and layers and levels.
so these three types around your center that you could be, are
Mm.
they again in different circumstances you might be those, or you are one of those types?
The way those work is generally that you will have a preference towards one. If it's like a pie chart, you might be a 50 or 60% one to one, 30% by the fridge, self-preservatory, and 10% social. I think
Okay.
that adds up to 100.
Yeah.
So that can change a little bit over time. If one says I'd like to be a bit more social, one can make efforts in that direction. Clearly, but one can still feel those fundamental impulses, and they are pretty primal, because people say that they are related really to when humans were in their early stages of what made them safe.
Yeah.
So it makes you safe to be near the source of food. It makes you safe to be safe within a group that accepts you, or it's important to be very close one to one with someone who's important within the group.
Yeah, you see, that's so interesting because I feel like the 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 one-to-one thing, or the being close to the the survival one, I totally relate to both of those.
Mm,
And feel like it's almost 0% for the social one. And
right.
yet, as I've got older, there's a yearning for like an ability to
Mm,
be more social, even though it's totally unnatural. I mean,
mm,
it's very uncomfortable for me, or I almost don't, it's like a language I don't speak. So I
okay.
feel very kind of awkward in that I don't really know what to say or do in those group situations.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a sense of, in that sense of wanting to balance out
Yeah.
life, and
Yeah.
knowing that those difficult places, it's good to go there to try and at least get a little bit of knowledge,
Yeah.
because it will help balance the whole out.
Absolutely. And I completely agree. And given that one suddenly understands, oh right, that's okay. So I am that. All right. Well, I don't have to be that forever, but I understand what the challenge is. I
Mm.
didn't, it gives you a different way to understand the challenge. Okay, well, I would like to be more able to be comfortable in social situations. And that may mean, for instance, giving up the hope um, of having that very specific intensity
Mm.
with the one person in the room. I've done a fair bit of teaching with groups, and I know that I'm more effective one to one. I know that when I'm speaking to the group, I'm thinking, if only I could say specific things to that person right now, that would be really helpful for them. But it would look like I'm favoring that person or giving that person too much attention. So it's not really appropriate within that teaching session. But I've seen myself go, oh yeah, that's interesting, Mike, because that refers to your experience with reading Dostoevsky. So I would sort of pick people out on a sort of one-to-one basis and sort of establish that connection. But I've had to, one has to accept that speaking to a group is a different experience, and that there are different rules, and I can still have one-to-one experiences with other people, but that I take it as more of a specific sort of skills challenge to find a way to speak to groups that works.
So that it brings up straight away this thing of relationships with others now, because when you talk about this one-to-one thing, I realize that in relationship I'm very much a one-to-one person, in that I tend to kind of completely throw myself into that one relationship, and all my other relationships fall away. I mean, I'm not great at kind of maintaining those other relationships anyway, but when I'm in a relationship with a woman, that becomes my whole focus. And it feels very much like the one-to-one thing. It's like that's where all my attention goes. And it's only when the relationship ends that I realize, fucking hell, I've completely neglected everybody else I know.
Yeah, I wondered where you'd gone,
Yeah. For years I'll disappear, and then I'll kind of show up again, all like,
Yeah.
oh, where is everybody?
Yeah. Well, it is very, what can I say? Someone who favors one-to-one, it is very rewarding, because one wants that depth, intimacy. They do sometimes call it one-to-one stroke sexual, and there is a sexual aspect to that intimacy that one-to-one potentially offers. Obviously, not in all situations, but it's about that intensity. I mean, maybe they're all about intensity, but in different ways. I'm more familiar with that feeling of that possibility of what can happen in a one-to-one situation, like we're having at this moment. It is always pregnant with that possibility of a transformational moment occurring, and I don't get that same sense when I'm in a group necessarily. I mean, I'm not saying it isn't there. For the right person, it is there. For someone who thrives on social settings and moving groups of people, then it definitely is there. So it's a sort of limitation that I'd say on my behalf, as you're saying, that there is the potential for balance. So I don't want to be stuck in the one-to-one ghetto, or the having to be too close to the fridge, but so I have that's a bit of work for me to do. Yeah. So again, it's a map that sort of tells you a little bit more about what your work is, what your psychological and spiritual work is, which is fantastically clarifying. I'd also say that it helps. I genuinely feel that as one understands the other types, because the more one reads description, because it tends to be the way that one gets to know the Enneagram, the more one reads descriptions of types of people, the more one is tempted to say, "Oh, I know someone who's that. I know a 7." I met someone at a party, and they said to me, "Well, what else in the world is there but fun?" And I thought, 7. It was just very, very clear, and that maybe I don't want to put that person in a box, but it allows me to see the lens through which that person sees life. And it allows me to some extent to feel how much a person is driven by compulsion and how much they're driven by evolution, if you will, where they're going to take that impulse, what they're going to do with that impulse on a soul level, if you like. So I feel it leads to more compassion for other people, because we can understand, oh, that's why they do that. That's why that person is doing that, because they're they've gone to stress in that particular way, or they're struggling within their own type because of something. It's really helped me to understand other people, to understand myself, to understand characters within writing, and it's fascinating with films, because when a character is well written within a film, they will display the complexity of things that go together within a type, which can often be quite paradoxical, you think. Quite things that are just very paradoxical. But you go, okay, so a 5, as I am, will often have really quite arcane interests, really obscure interests that no one else would be interested in. The wing patterns of a particular insect or something, something like that. So that kind of detail for a detective, say, or a detective character, would be kind of interesting to me, because it adds a layer of authenticity, and so it is great for writing. But there's also an aspect there, which is when you see an actor who is not of that type, you can you get to sense when an actor is a particular type, but they're playing a different type, and the extent to which they're able to act a different type. It's really fascinating, and whether by instinct casting people choose people who match their character types with their actual type.
Yeah, it's quite possible, isn't it? I
Yeah,
think it's an interesting idea to look at all the really successful characters in films or in anything like that, and
yeah,
see whether or not that's exactly what's going on, like you're describing, that they
yeah.
are
Are
more
they well written enough?
life in that they have these subtleties and
Mm,
these kind of extra parts to them that come in that may be contradictory or paradoxical, but
yeah,
actually we recognize them, and that's why they're more convincing. And then you have that other layer of the actor then also
mm,
adding to that, because
mm,
either they're really good at inhabiting those different places on the wheel, or
mm,
they're already naturally aligned to that character, and so they can embody it,
yeah,
more.
yeah. It's really fascinating. A good example, for instance, Hamlet is a number 4. He's a
Oh, okay.
tragic character, tragic romantic.
Cool.
To
Yeah.
be or not to be, he's really down in the existential dirt, uh, really thinking about what he's going to do, and a lot of actors, actually, quite a lot of actors are 4s, but they can also be 3s, but they can be 4-ish 3s. So the extent to which it will, let's put it this way, it will be easier for an actor who is more 4-ish to play Hamlet than it will for someone who's a 3. And yeah, I mean, you would almost certainly get actors in the 2, 3, 4 area, maybe a little bit in 5, and maybe a little bit in 1, but then you can predict fairly well that that certain professions are likely to be within a certain territory. There will be exceptions, clearly, but you get a sense of how that might work.
Mm. So the next place to go then is relationships between people. So
Yeah.
then other, and how, what we might call chemistry between people.
Mm,
Is there a relationship between this and
yeah.
that? And
Yeah.
those people that I've certainly met people who I could never find a connection with. And is it
Yeah.
because they maybe are completely somewhere else on the wheel that's
Yeah. Well,
outside of.
absolutely. This is a completely fascinating subject, and yeah, I mean, I have sort of thought at different times of establishing an Enneagram dating program, enneadating.com, because it's incredibly helpful to relationships, to understand this stuff. It's just so helpful. a lot of successful relationships are between people who are next to each other on the wheel, as you call it. And there are reasons for that, in that they're not exactly the same. That you do get couples who are both the same, right? And that can be very resonant. You know, two sevens kind of high on life. Whoa, let's both go parachuting out of the airplane without a parachute. That's a lot of great fun there to be had. So that can work. But you know, for instance, if one had a two-ish one with a one-ish two, then that can be a great combination, because they're appreciating each other, but not exactly at the same place. They're appreciating each other's wings, their own wings to an extent. So that can often work really, really well. I mean, there are books about compatibility between types and what they will like and what they will find challenging for whatever reason. But certainly there are reasons why you wouldn't, from a specific point on the Enneagram, wouldn't understand another particular type.
Right.
Apart from the subtypes that we've talked about. But and we may not appreciate the relative health of another person within their own type. They may not appreciate the relative health of us in our own type, the extent to which we are bound by our compulsions, and that can be a source of challenge. Sometimes you can get situations where, for instance, people are in relationships with people who are at their stress point. So if, for instance, me as a 5, I was in relationship with a 7 person, that might work better for them because they're on their journey to 5 for integration's sake. If they can make that journey, sevens within the whole Enneagram, 7s find spiritual and psychological growth, possibly, this is generalization, but possibly the hardest, because they so want to be just high on life and not look at any of the difficulties or challenges of life. But a 5 and a 7 relationship would involve the 5 who are naturally quite inclined towards study and growth and learning, wanting the fun-loving 7 to become more grown up in a certain way, and the 7 will want to draw the 5 into that world of, come on, let's be crazy, let's do stuff, let's go to the beach. And that's actually where the 5 will naturally be going in a stress state, really. So that can work against a relationship where you've got that going on. But definitely next to each other is good. The 9-6-3 triangle, this 9-6-3 triangle is interesting because it appears to be completely separate, as you pointed out right at the beginning, from the rest of the diagram. And in many ways, it sort of is. I can meet someone and go, I'm not quite sure. They're either a 3, a 9, or a 6. They're on the triangle, but I'm not quite sure yet where they might be. And because with a triangle, you're either at your main type, you're at your stress point, or you're at your integration point. There's nowhere else. Effectively, of course, we have the wings, but a 9 will either be on their journey to 3, or they'll be stressfully going back to 6. So that's quite a strong dynamic of its own. You will see people going between those points quite actively sometimes, moving between them. So yeah, it's certainly interesting to think about in relationship terms, as well as the subtype issue. Who one might get on better with. It's probably good to look at a book that talks about these combinations and about potential positives and potential challenges. And clearly everyone different, for every type, there's a very different person who's on a very individual journey. But there will be some pattern to it. But I think we've spoken about this before. I think if we share a journey, and if we share awareness of our journey, and this is another tool to help us understand what journey we're on, I think this can be a real assistance to a relationship. Not that one necessarily wants to talk about the Enneagram all the time, but it can really help for one person to understand another, and for each party to understand the other party from where they are in the Enneagram, and to be compassionate towards their challenges, really, from that perspective. People are not necessarily being difficult on purpose. They're just dealing with their particular compulsions that are generating out of where they sit in this model. That's just how it is.
Well, and that goes for all the kinds of models that are out there. I mean, whether or not it's astrology, that which is again is something I don't know that much about, but time and again in my life, the signs that people do seem to have, there is a consistency that I've noticed. There is a pattern. There are aspects of myself which I totally recognize as Taurus, and I've seen it so much that there's something in that, and again, all of those things are useful as kind of bits of information to understand what's going on, or sort of psychosocial development. I know I've talked to you about the Graves model, and you said you weren't that familiar with it, but that's another map of kind of that's more to do with development, though, as you go through these stages in your life, and as societies as a whole go through stages of development. But also as a tool for understanding why somebody is doing what they're doing. These things are so powerful because they just they do just give you that understanding. Oh, okay, that's why. That's why that person reads a Telegraph. That's why that person reads the Guardian.
Yeah.
And you can really see it because they have those values, and that's why they'll never convince each other that that their way is the right way. And it's only when one of them goes through a change that they'll even start to understand that, or the other recognizes that part of them that's in them that does relate to that other person.
And I think it means that we don't have to judge people for being where they are as much. If it leads to more forgiveness and compassion for other people, and for ourselves actually as well, as importantly, then it's a positive. And what I really appreciate about the Enneagram is that it's a dynamic model. It's not saying this is you and this is what you're going to be forever. It's saying this is where you might be at the moment, and these are the potentials for you, and these are the directions you can travel in, and this is how you can grow, and this is how you can expand, and you can go as deep as you like with it. And that generally I would say that people, like in the wisdom of the Enneagram, it would encourage meditation, maybe some therapies of different kinds, awareness practices, all those kinds of things that are going to help if one isn't going to go to a Sufi Brotherhood monastery in the middle of the Caucasus. One can do these things in normal life, in what we call normal life these days. And and I rarely, for me, this is 16, 17 years later, rarely a day goes by where I don't have a question that is generated by my search to understand people in this way, and to understand myself using something of this. I just find it universally and infinitely interesting. There's no end to it. It's not like, oh, got it, thank you, all done, got it. It's an endless progression, and because we all have the potential of infinite progression.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
rest my case,
That was
as the railway porter said.
yeah, that was a really yeah, that made it all a lot clearer to me anyway.
Oh well, I'm glad. I think it is quite challenging to sort of explain it in the abstract. Um,
Yeah, it's
and
good. I
I
think
think,
useful that we both kind of recognize. Well, you obviously because you're very much more familiar with it, but because of conversations we've had previously as well, I can see quite clearly that number one is where I'm centered. So it's good to have those personal references to give it the context.
yeah, agree.
So
Yeah,
it
yeah.
doesn't just become words and, abstract.
No, I
Yeah.
know it is challenging, and I think to read books in which, as it were, ordinary people give accounts of their experience of being in a particular place, or a good account of each of the types that you can read through and go, okay, that makes sense. Maybe not that, and just to really feel that whole the panoply of how we are all different, because for me, we're all somewhere in that. There isn't anything else, but for me, there aren't other type. There isn't a type 10, 11, and 12 and 13. That's it. It's all in there, and all the characters in all of literature and life are in there. That's been my experience.
Mm.
They're in there somewhere.
I'm going to bring us back
Oh,
to full. Oh,
well, that's been very good. I hope it's been clear for people, and it is only I'm really only scratching the
yeah.
surface.
No, I
Um,
feel like that was a good introduction. And,
good.
I don't know. I think we kind of touched on most of the obvious questions anyway. I hope so.
Mm. Well, I used to run a meetup group, meetup.com group, which was an introduction to the Enneagram over 6 evenings, which was great and really enjoyable, and lots of people learned a lot. And we did some meditations during that time, and I think it was pretty illuminating. I may do some of that again, given my preference for one-to-one working. I may be doing some what might be called Enneagram coaching on a sort
Yeah,
of
well,
one-to-one
I
basis.
was I was going to ask, is that something you're open to if people are interested to get in touch
Yeah, I
and
am. I'm not
explore?
technically a qualified Enneagram coach, but it's not really a. I mean, people call themselves Enneagram coaches, as they probably call themselves life coaches. But I'm certainly open to having the conversations and to using what I know to assist people.
Great, good.
Lovely. I
Well,
don't know what more can be said.
what more can be said? Well,
It's 9:21.
goodness me.
We've been nattering for ages.
We have, but it was a pleasure. Really
It's
was.
been lovely. Yeah, I love your hair, by the way.
Yeah, I've been considering. I'm probably at peak hair now. Before I might have to get the scissors on it,
Really, gosh.
the
And
old lockdown hairstyle. But I'm quite enjoying it.
you see, I'm painting you at the moment when you had hair that was really long.
Oh yeah, yeah, down my
Yeah,
back hair
which is sort of well, it's sort of like this. Yeah, I have to have the hat on just to keep it in check, really.
to keep it under control.
I look like an old bag lady, in fact, but
With
never
the hat
mind.
on, and then I said it before, you're a bit Julian Assange without the hat.
Yeah, yeah,
Poor Julian, who's stuck in prison being slowly killed by the state, which is horrific. But
it,
anyway,
it's just a long and sad story.
yeah. Well, don't leave it there, Tim. You fucking perfect.
Yeah, yeah. What have you done there? You,
No, you know what I want to do? Here's
did
what I
you
want
just
to
go
do.
to
I
four?
would like, Keith, I would like us both now
Hmm.
seriously, to send some love to Julian Assange, who is being fucking murdered by the state in prison, slowly being killed, and, you know, representing freedom of speech, which is under attack at the moment. So I would like us to end just by sending some good vibes and some healing love and
Yeah.
power
Well,
to him right now.
I'm happy to ask for perfect healing for Julian Assange and
Yeah,
perfect accountability for all those for him and for all those involved with him.
good. Me too. All right. Well, we will we will reconvene, no doubt, again in the
Let's
future.
let's do this again sometime.
Sure.
Did we talk about art when we first?
We did.
I,
Well,
we
yeah,
I mean I
we
know
did.
we did before we started recording tonight, but did we when we last spoke?
Yeah, we did, but we only scratched the surface of that really. There's
Hmm.
more. There's a lot more in there to be.
Well, maybe we could talk about drawing and painting and maybe show some of our work because I've loved your drawings of your, you know, your head drawings
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
that you've been using in different places. And I remember the time when we sat round the fire and at your place and we did some of that drawing. And the line work in those is beautiful and fantastic. And I really appreciate them. I know that one of them's on the cover of your poetry book.
Yeah.
But you know, maybe we could both show bits of artwork on the screen.
Yeah. Although I've got not that much, but perhaps I need to do a painting. That would be good. That might force my hand.
Well,
You're good at doing that.
you blinking well do need to do a
Yeah,
painting.
yeah. So maybe that's it. So I'll speak to you in 10 years when I've done my painting.
It's not going to be like that.
No, it's
I don't
not.
know
It's not.
when you know they say you can only choose your conditions, and rather than you know choose what you actually want. So I don't know what the conditions are that are going to make you do your painting, which might involve me coming round.
Well, I did have one idea actually, which was when this whole lockdown bullshit's finished, um, to come and hang out while you're painting. Now I don't know whether that's even something you would want to do, but I'm feeling this actually about there's another person, a woman I know who paints that I also want to ask if I can just come to a studio and kind of pick up or watch and observe and learn how they're going about it and try it out for myself in their way and
Okay.
see what works, what doesn't,
Well,
or even go on a journey myself, but alongside someone who's already in the flow and
yeah,
making it happen.
I would love to have you here or to do that with you there, and I would insist that you produce something as well.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. I come to your where you paint, and I
Yeah,
paint something with while you're painting, so I can kind of copy your process,
yeah,
learn a
I'm
bit about
happy
it.
to explain it. And I've been thinking about doing some art tuition actually for groups over the next year or two,
Oh, great.
and I would love to do that with you. Name the date, and that will be the day when you do your first painting.
There you go. Maybe that's it. Well, as soon as lockdown's over, I'll be up for that.
I don't want to wait that long.
Okay,
Just bring your glass case,
okay. I'll come in my glass bubble.
something like that. Oh, we could do it on Zoom, couldn't we?
No, no. It needs to be there physically
Okay,
for me.
all right.
We could,
Oh,
we could
darn it!
attempt
You've
something like
managed to
that.
wriggle out of it.
No, I don't. That see doesn't seem like doing it to me. Paint is a physical medium. I need to be there.
Okay, I've got a shed that has two ends to it. Yeah, that might work. And it's got a glass partition between the two ends, and you can see what's happening in each end.
There you go. There'll be some kind of sci-fi.
I think it could work. I really think your drawings are fantastic, and I'd love to. I, you know, of course I could say more is better, but um, I think there is something really great in them.
Yeah, what was interesting about those was that because I was using that method of not looking at what I
Yeah.
was doing,
Yeah.
it freed up all of that control, and the perfectionist was
Yeah.
derailed by it.
Yeah.
That's why it worked, because
Yeah.
the perfectionist murders it, I'm so dissatisfied with whatever I do if I'm doing it in that conventional way of seeing it. It's, that I just fuck myself up. And because I know that it's that beautiful balance between freedom and freeness and looseness and craft and control. It's that place where they
Mm.
meet that will produce a great painting for me, it seems. So it's like, how do I bring that into balance? And so the reason I did those drawings like that was that I knew it would completely derail the perfectionist. So that kind of flowing, the line, the
Mm.
beauty, the art could actually come through,
Mm.
because I'd given up the need to get it exactly right. So if I can then come back again from that place and bring that line and meet in the middle somewhere, that will be the challenge, I think, for me.
Yeah. I mean, I have my own version of, and I have it more in writing than in painting, but I have my own version of the critic who steps in and says, "Oh, you don't do it like that," or "That's no good," or whatever it is, and one is involved in a process of actively switching that voice off for long enough to produce something.
Yeah.
And there are things that one can do that make that possible.
Well, I'm interested in exploring those.
And it does involve surrendering control.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, yeah, to this kind of, in some of those affirmations that you sent me, this idea of the will, my will, kind of surrendering to this
Mm.
higher will of
Mm.
spirit that moves through me, this kind of higher part that's less
Mm.
the ego, the controller, the,
Mm.
yeah, interesting.
It's
Well,
not
those,
ego at all.
not ego.
It's not ego at all.
Okay.
That what comes through you in that way.
What you mean, the higher part?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But overcoming the kind of smaller will.
Yeah. Asking for it to not be present, because one isn't going to expunge the ego permanently in one fell swoop. It's just not possible.
Well, no, and it's a useful thing. You need it. You need
Yeah.
it as
Yeah,
well.
but it's not, and it doesn't help in this context.
Yeah.
So, the appropriate asking and attuning, if you will, before one starts a process, to attuning to the spiritual force, if you will, to one's higher self, and asking that to be free of the influences and impulses of the ego will help.
Mm.
It's an activity. It's a practice. It's a practice in which initially and perhaps ultimately the result is entirely irrelevant, because that's part of what one has to surrender, is one's attachment to any kind of particular result.
Sure. Yeah. The
If you
outward.
don't care, if you don't care what the result is, why do you care about the process?
Exactly. Yeah. And if you're so pinned on the result, the process has been murdered. It can't even
Yeah,
happen because it's so limited by the expectation.
yeah. None of my
It's
paintings
stillborn.
turn out
It's stillborn, basically.
exactly. It arrives dead. Exactly. None of my paintings, none of my
Arrives on
paintings,
time and dead.
none of my paintings turn out the way I intend them.
Yeah.
But I'm really happy with a lot of them, because they're kind of better than I could have imagined if I get out of the way.
Yeah.
And that's just lovely. And I look at them and think, who did that?
Mm.
I don't even know if me now was there at the time, and maybe I wasn't.
Mm.
It was something else.
Yeah. Getting out of the way.
Yeah. So
Mm.
I'd love to do that with you
Yeah, that sounds
on a
good.
regular basis.
Yeah, that would be great. Well, it would, anything that gets me back in and makes me start kind of doing it. And once, you see, the thing with me is I'm a terrible procrastinator.
I know.
But once I'm in, I'm really good and quick at getting a habit fixed.
Okay.
So once
Well,
I get on, I'm on it and I can do it then.
okay. Well, I mean, there are all sorts of, I'm going to say, use the word tricks, but techniques to get oneself to be more productive. One has to use, because the mind is tricky, sometimes one just has to use tricks like saying, no one's going to see this. No one but me is ever going to see this. No one but me is ever going to read this, whatever it is, as a way of just liberating because some of the ego is censor. It's thinking, oh, what's X going to think? What's the world going to think? Will they think I'm not very good, etc., etc. So, for instance, you could decide to do one drawing in the way you've done a drawing every day.
Hmm.
And how long would that take you?
Well, not long, exactly.
About 3 minutes?
Hmm.
Yeah. So, there's nothing really stopping you except what is it? Some pride about being a great artist or
Well,
something.
I don't know. There's also two children and a fucking survival situation.
No, I refuse. I refuse to accept that because we've spent 2.5 hours doing
You're
this,
right. You're
and
right.
it only takes 3 minutes to do one of those
Yeah,
pictures. We
you're
could
right.
we could have done one now. You could have
But
done
there'll
one
be
of
fucking
me.
hundreds of them.
You could have done 10 of me looking like this
Yeah.
just while I was rattling on.
Maybe we'll do that's something we might do on the next caller.
I like it.
That would be fun, wouldn't it?
I like it.
Go and draw and show. Let's do
Yeah,
that. Let's do that.
yeah. And I don't mind if it's draw and not show. I don't care, so long as it gets you to do it.
Yeah. Cool. Great.
Because it's a momentum activity. The
Yeah.
more you do, the more things become possible. The more things open up. You've got to get through the first, through the second, through the third, through the fourth. And every painting reveals something about what you're going to do next, perhaps. And it just changes your inner world and your inner feelings about it.
Yeah. Life, it's a momentum activity.
You got it. It's a t-shirt. Woo!
There you go. Brilliant.
Well, enjoy the Alfred Sisley paintings
Yeah. I
of the
will.
snow.
I
Highly
will.
recommended. Yeah.
And the Glaswegian.
Yes, Joan Eardley, Eardley. Yeah,
Cool.
terrific.
Exciting. Yeah. Well, I'll go and have a look now, actually.
Okie dokie. Lovely to see you.
Yeah.
Great to chat,
Thank you very much.
and we'll we'll do this or something like it again soon.
Great. All right.
You take care.
You too. Goodbye.
Bye, Timmy.